IB Nation, welcome. We are covering the commitments of 2024 Hannibal running back Aeneas Williams to the University of Notre Dame. Chose Notre Dame over finalists Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky. Boasts one of the more prolific offer lists that you'll see around the country for 2024. A lot of the top names, top schools, top programs that you think of when you think of college football. I'm Ryan Roberts, of course, Director of Scouting here at IrishBreakdown.com. That is Ryan Smith over there, joining us tonight, who knows Aeneas very well, has kind of been familiar with the film and the backstory and a little bit of the recruiting, and we'll cover everything here tonight because it's a massive pickup for Notre Dame. Before we start this little commitments recap here, just hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast. If you're signed up at boards.irishbreakdown.com, you would have known weeks ago that we felt pretty good about this one finally here. So, Brian, big pickup for Notre Dame here, man. Before we get into a little bit of the backstory, Aeneas is rated by Rivals as the number one all-purpose back in the 2024 class, number 106 player overall, consensus 4-star across the board. Pretty interesting kid as well, because the offers really started rolling in this past spring into the summer when he kind of hit the camp circuit and really started to get the attention of some of the premier programs in all of college football, and his rankings have risen tremendously. 108 touchdowns in the first 3 years of his career, which is just nutty, absurd. So, Brian, big pickup, though, obviously here for Notre Dame, man. Number one all-purpose back in the class. A year after they're going to be pulling Jeremiah Love and combining it with the running back crew that Notre Dame has now. This is a pretty big one for Notre Dame.
This is a kid that kind of bursted onto the scene for those people out there that don't know much about Aeneas when he went to the Army All-American Bowl underclassmen combine, which they're going to have probably every year. It's something that you just don't know when kids show up. Sometimes kids don't do as well in those settings. I was told he was far and away the best running back there in terms of how he ran the drills. And that word got out. And then people started going to the school he's at. But it's a program that doesn't normally have kids. So it's harder to grade his film, see what he does, because he just mauls people at that level. It's not even fun for him probably in a lot of ways where he's at playing high school football. To Ryan's point a minute ago, if you average 108 by 3, that's 36 a year, including his freshman year.
Where he had 27, and then he had 47 as a sophomore, Brian, to your point. Yes, it's pretty good, man. Pretty decent.
I mean, I watched a little bit of his film from his sophomore year. I haven't wasted my time with his junior year because nobody at that level can do much against him. And the next time I watch him, I want it to be 7-on-7 or camp circuit, Under Armour, something else of that nature, because I need to see him against other guys. But this is what I've been told. Alabama had him number one on their board, is what I heard. Mm-hmm. Even if that's remotely close, I'm good with it. First off, yes. that's the first thing people need to know. Second of all, he's a do-it-all back. I mean, I forget which one you said had him number one as an all-around back, but he catches the ball well. If you're going to play in modern college football, I mean, there's nothing wrong with a pure power back and all that, but if you can't catch, how valuable are you in the spread? He can do that, and he's over 200 pounds, 210, 215 probably by the time he fills out. So, he's an NFL body waiting to happen, and he's tremendous in short area space. So that part you can tell even on the film against subpar competition, because a lot of guys are, they're pretty much dead to rights to hit him and knock him down, and they don't even come close to it. He's tremendous in short area space. So he's what you're looking for. Notre Dame gets love last year out of Missouri. They're going to get another one. It's hilarious how all of a sudden the state of Missouri for Notre Dame, Ryan. I don't know what's in the water over there by the river, but it's working out well for the Irish.
Well, and we are definitely going to get into that as part as kind of the class impacts, because like you said, Notre Dame has really hit St. Louis hard in 2023. We're going to count Hannibal, even though it's like an hour away from St. Louis, as part of St. Louis for this cover. We'll just cover the whole state of Missouri, obviously. Yes.
It's close to the river. We're good.
Yeah. And Notre Dame has some other top targets on the board in 2024 out of the St. Louis area as well, which we will definitely get into. A couple more cool notes, because I had the chance to talk to Aeneas is, I almost call him Kyron Williams because it's such a natural comparison, but we'll get into comparisons, I'm sure, at some point too. But talk to his head coach, Jason Nolan's out of Hannibal High School. And Brian, I love this stat. Freshman year, all-purpose back, second team All-State, 27 touchdowns. Sophomore year, first team All-State as a wide receiver. Junior year, first team All-State as a running back. He's literally made All-State 3 straight years at 3 different spots, which is, we talk about all-purpose, right? And you said it perfectly. This kid can do a little bit of everything, man. Like, they'll throw him out wide as a number 1 wide receiver. They'll put him in the slot. He'll work out of the backfield in the passing game. He'll obviously play running back. He even had 73 tackles and 3 interceptions on the defensive side of the football as a sophomore as well. So this is a kid who, I feel like we use this terminology too often, but he is a man amongst boys in his level of competition. Like, there's no doubt about that, right? So massive get for Notre Dame, though, because I think that when you look at what they've been able to do at the running back position over the last couple years, moving back to the Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, into the Jadarian Price, Jabron Payne, now Jeremiah Love committed in the 2023 class to Notre Dame as well. Now moving into Aneyas Williams. Notre Dame's not going to be hurting at the running back position a ton, but want to get in a little bit to the backstory here because it's an interesting one. So he was a young man who was on Notre Dame's radar. I know they've been keeping close tabs on him dating back to the spring and into the summer, obviously, but it was Irish Invasion where he originally got his offer. He went out there and Brian, I think that we need to mention this again because you pointed this out, right? They wanted to see him, as a lot of schools did, in a camp setting, see what he looks like, because the film, you can get only so much out of that film. Let's be honest, right? Like, he's playing against kids that he is
way better,
easily the best player on the fields, right? So they get him to camp, Irish Invasion. He impresses, obviously, tests well, do all that stuff that you need him to kind of check those boxes, gets the offer that weekend. And from there, he's now been on campus 3 times since April, if I remember correctly. And the one time that he did, one of the game day visits he took this season was Clemson, was the first one. And we got the information that during the Clemson visit, he silent to Notre Dame, committed there at the football game. Then 2 weeks later, he comes back for the Boston College game. And I think that just reaffirmed everything, right? Like, he had already made the decision, but that was really the final piece of the puzzle as far as just reaffirming, going back there as a silent commit and or part of the class. And, this one wasn't much of a secret, to be honest here for a couple weeks, but it's again, big get for Notre Dame, fascinating backstory. And I think that the biggest thing for me, Brian, is 1, you're getting a talented athlete. 2, you're getting at a position that you continue to do really well at, both recruiting and developing at the running back position. And you already mentioned a part that I wanted to talk about here, was the fact that class impact. We usually do the position first, then the class, but I want to start with the class impact because I want to hit into the St. Louis, Missouri area conversation for a second, which is important, very important. So 2023 class, you have Christian Gray, star cornerback out of De Smet Jesuit. You have Jeremiah Love out of Christian Brothers, out of the St. Louis area as well. Now fast forward to 2024, Notre Dame has their eyes on several key targets in Missouri and coupled obviously more in the St. Louis area. Hannibal, again, about an hour away from the St. Louis area. But you get now a player like Aeneas Williams in 2024 class. You still have guys like Ryan Wingo out of St. Louis University, star wide receiver, one of the top 2 to 3 wide receivers in the class, depending on what recruiting platform you're looking at. And Jeremiah McClellan, who is the teammate of Jeremiah Love out of Christian Brothers Academy as well. So I just think that, again, Brian, we talk about what the home base is, right? Indiana has sporadically some good football players that come out of the state, right? You talk about the Jalen Smiths of the world, talk about George Karlaftis, but it's not a hotbed for talent at a high level anyway, consistently. So I believe, and I would love your insight on this, but I believe that St. Louis and just the Missouri spot in general, the state in general, is an important place for Notre Dame to frequent because right now, Missouri's a down program, right? Like, you're not going to keep a lot of those kids in state. So now you're going to be wrestling with the Midwestern powers, then to the Oklahomas, to the Tennessees, like that. Those are going to be kind of the teams that you're going to be wrestling with. And I think Notre Dame has a big opportunity to kind of keep a lot of those St. Louis kids in the Midwest and keep them and bring them to South Bend, because I think that that is an area that has continued to put out a lot of talent, especially recently. And I think it's one spot that Notre Dame definitely needs to tap into more here.
A couple of things. Number one, you're right. They haven't been good recently, but let's go one step further. I will be 50 years old next year, and it's been longer than that since Missouri was consistently good. That's not a good sign. And when I say consistently, I mean like they could win 10 games out of 12 or at least 9 out of 11 before they went to the 12. They just, when it was the Big Eight, they were pretty competitive in the 60s to early 70s. But since then, they've only had a few little stints where they were good. And the kids that are now 14 to 18 years old in that recruiting range, they don't really know that. And kids in today's age, if I had my cell phone next to me, I'd hold it up. If it didn't happen in the last 10 minutes, they don't care. They just don't. It's just right now attitude. It's terrible. I don't agree with it, but that's how it works. And to that point, this year they had to battle. I mean, they're in, to Missouri's credit, they're in the SEC East. That's not exactly the easiest league to battle through. So that being the case, it's going to be hard for them to be better than 6-6 most years. And these kids know it. They did get the one kid last year, the receiver. I forget what his name is, but he was a national.
Luther Burden. Yeah.
He was. He could have went anywhere he wanted. He could have went anywhere he wanted. He went to Missouri and started right away. Good for him. That's great. He'll be a 3-and-out player, but he would have been a 3-and-out player at Colgate. It doesn't matter. And he knew it. He just decided to stay home. It's 2 hours from home, whatever. That's fine. Most kids aren't going to do that. If you look at Rivals on 3, 247, and you go through and they have these state rankings, one of the things you can do as a barometer, the rankings changed a little bit, but especially top 5, it's pretty much the same kids by all the services. Any state you want, Ohio, Florida, Georgia, Texas. If you want to see how dominant a program is, go to any of those rankings. How many of the top 5 kids went to State U? And then maybe go top 10 kids. Did they get at least 4 or 5 of them? Missouri, not so much. They're just not. The kids, They go to Iowa, they go to Illinois, they go to Notre Dame. They just go all over, and then Georgia will get like one kid, or Oklahoma will get like one kid. They just go everywhere. They're not loyal. Why would you not recruit it if you were Notre Dame?
Right.
And it's just far enough where they get the quote unquote college experience. But if they want to drive home for the weekend, it's 5 hours or something like that to St. Louis, 4, I don't know, something like that. It's the perfect range. And you mentioned the kids that are going to sign with Notre Dame in this class, private schools, for whatever reason. And I don't know the dynamics in St. Louis right now. But private schools are just dominate. I mean, they do in a lot of areas, but in St. Louis, it is just completely dominant. The one program that does well that's public is actually East St. Louis, which is in Illinois. But I ran into somebody in Tampa recently, and she knows McClellan and all of them. Her kid played with them. They just moved to St. Louis. And she said the deal there is it's not like Florida where you can just transfer a million times. You transfer, you sit out. So the kids, they'll transfer to East St. Louis. They're still playing the same area. They don't have to sit out. So that's one of the advantages there. But these kids are all playing against each other. They all know each other. They all hang out with each other, same trainers. Once you're in to that little group, and Notre Dame is obviously in. I know that they're in with Wingo and some of these other guys. Breedell Richardson, I don't know if you saw it today. He tweeted out Notre Dame today. Yes. I know Breedell extremely well. He played with Wingo this past spring with Fast Houston down in a New Orleans tournament. And I didn't even know who Wingo was. I took a picture of him. And I had no idea at the time. And I watched him take off. I'm like, who is that guy? I mean, it's just absurd how fast he is. He's raw as all get out. Breedell's a much better pure receiver. But the physical tools for Wingo are just utterly ridiculous. So there's a lot of talent there. You have to recruit it. And it's not so far south that you're going to just completely bang heads with Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, etc. It's the perfect niche for Notre Dame. And if you can complement your Midwest recruiting, Ohio, Chicago with it, man, that makes life a lot easier. Because, I mean, I live in the South now. Wherever I'm at, It's the same thing. Most of the coaches down here, they do not like Notre Dame. They just don't.
Sure.
They're not going to help you. In St. Louis, you're probably going to get a lot more help. That's the final point I want to make.
Yeah.
It is a Midwest hub, and Notre Dame should always be able to at least get their foot in the door. And right now, they've kicked in the door, so that's great.
Yeah, and the, kind of the home base around Notre Dame that we talk a lot about. We talk a lot about usually offensive linemen up north, right? Guys that Notre Dame's going to tap into, the Illinois of the world. Obviously Charles Jagasaw in this cycle, the Ohio occasionally, Indiana occasionally. You're going to find some really good offensive linemen. I think the key point, though, about the St. Louis area, Brian, is a lot of really good athletes are coming out of there. I mean, we're talking about 2023 Christian Gray, a cornerback, right? We're talking about Jeremiah Love, a running back athlete type who's a dynamic player. Talking about Aeneas Williams, another running back. And then we just mentioned 2 wide receivers in Ryan Wingo and Jeremiah McClellan. So they're going to the St. Louis area not for offensive linemen, defensive linemen. They're trying to find skill position, guys that can kind of make it go. And I mean, we've talked about this a ton, right? That's one of the key spots that Notre Dame needs to get better at consistently moving forward, right?
We got to find more kids from cold weather states that can play on the perimeter. Yes. I've talked about that with 1 million people that are following Notre Dame for 25, 30 years. For whatever the reason, it's more sporadic. Used to be like Rocket came out in '88, the year before they got Ricky Waters. They were both from Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. When a kid like that comes out of PA now, there are so few of them. Notre Dame usually doesn't even finish in the top 2 every now and then, but they've struggled to get those kids in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. Ohio, if it's a true skill kid, I mean, let's be realistic. 1 out of 20, your kid's going to go to Ohio State. The kid's going to go to Ohio State. Yep. So Michigan, the Johnson kid a couple of years ago, the corner, well, his dad played at Michigan. Gee, where did he sign? It's hard to keep these kids because there's so few of them. Those schools are going to put all their resources into getting them. In Florida, Texas, Louisiana, like the 5th or 6th best receiver in a state like Louisiana could end up all SEC at Mississippi State. And LSU didn't even freaking offer it. Right. It's just different. There just aren't as many of them. It's just the way it is. And I don't have the definition for it, but when Notre Dame can get in and get some of them and not have to come to Florida, not have to come to Texas every year. I mean, you can do it. Obviously, they got how many? They got 3 Texas receivers in this class, which probably will not happen again in my lifetime, to be honest.
Well, let's hope, though, Brian. Let's hope, though.
Well, I mean, I'm all for being wrong. I would love to be wrong on that. But, I mean, that is not a situation that's going to happen every year. But Texas is obviously one of those states where Notre Dame has some pull, obviously, or they wouldn't have got those kids. It's a little better academically than a lot of the other southern states. So, okay. But Missouri, again, farther north, not as far away. They're used to cold weather. All the pluses. Please keep doing what you're doing. Sometimes, as the old saying says, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Just keep going there until the well runs dry. I mean, it's amazing because outside of maybe Cleveland right now, there is no other Midwest city producing skill guys, not just linemen and stuff, but perimeter players like St. Louis. And it might be better. I don't even pay attention to Ohio, I'm honest, because they're not going to go to Notre Dame. They're not. They're going to go to Ohio State, the elite kid. If you look at the top 5 players that are skill kids, except for Styles, when was the last elite skill player that came to Notre Dame from the state of Ohio? Not good. Elite. I think it was the running back in 98 or something like that. I forget. He was from Euclid. Man, Ohio State wanted him, but Urban Meyer recruited him. That also helped a little bit. He was a solid recruiter. But other than that, they just can't get skill kids out of there. And that's the only state that consistently pumps out the skill guys. Most of the best athletes in the Midwest want to play hoops. I'm from Indiana. I mean, the best athletes, the 6-foot kid, instead of playing corner and being smart, thinks he's going to the NBA, and he is not. So it's been a problem for decades. It hasn't changed.
Man. And again, man, I just want to reiterate, and I think you hit on a lot of key points, Brian. Like you're not going to get the skill position talents all the time in the North consistently in some of the home bases, but St. Louis is one that has been pumping it out the last couple of years, and Notre Dame needs to continue, in my opinion, to keep tapping into that well, getting that skill position talents. because you can always find linemen up north. But to your point, it's not always going to be easy to go down to the Floridas, to the southeastern teams, southeastern states, and win those battles. Like, it's just not going to be easy, right? So you may get one occasionally, but it's just not going to be a consistent thing, obviously. So St. Louis, big points of emphasis there, obviously, for this class impact. Running back, I think, on that side of it, Brian, because like that's more of the overall, is the fact that we're going to talk a little bit about what this class is right now, but I think just digging into St. Louis is a big part of this conversation. The Missouri just state in general, getting players from that state. And I also think that we need to talk about the running back position here with Notre Dame now moving forward, because you have a really interesting mix. Because again, this is a 2024 kid, but flash forward a little bit to 2024 when Aeneas Williams gets on campus at Notre Dame. You could potentially, and there's no, we live in the transfer portal era. Some kids are going to be seniors potentially at that point. So you don't know what the roster 100% is going to look like, right? But in theory, you could have a backfield that looks something like Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, Jadarian Price, Jabron Payne, Jeremiah Love, and Aneyas Williams. I would venture to ask you, Brian, because you got a little bit of the more historian NFL Notre Dame angle for this. When's the last time Notre Dame's been that deep at running back? I mean, honestly, and it's so interesting because it's so many different types, right? Like you have Estime, who's the 230-pound absolute hammer. You have Diggs, who's more of the 214, 215-pound kid who moves a little bit better in space, but still has kind of that downhill style. You talk about a Jadarian Price, as long as he comes back healthy, who is that one cut and I'm going to outrun anybody down.
Yes.
If you give me a sliver of dirt, like that's what he is. And he's filling out tremendously well. Jabron Payne has kind of that all around feel to him. Jeremiah Love is that one cut explosive back. Aeneas Williams is that other all purpose back that is a little bit similar ish to a Jabron Payne. So, I mean, it's been a while since Notre Dame's had this much running back talents potentially in stock over the next couple years.
The group that it was absurd what Holtz had done, and the 90 class that's famed for Notre Dame. Consider the following point, and you can count Bettis however you want because he was a freshman that year. They were so loaded. First off, just put it in perspective. Jerome obviously ends up in the Hall of Fame. He didn't play much as a freshman. Now, I know he's a freshman, but everybody in the country knew that was the guy. Every school in the country offered him out of McKenzie High School in Detroit. Okay, he goes to Notre Dame. Ricky Waters, Tony Brooks. Brooks would have been a long-time NFL player if he had a back injury. Brooks, Ricky Waters, and this one guy, you've probably heard of him. His name was Emmitt Smith. They were the three best running backs coming out of high school in 87. Solid.
Name sounds familiar. It sounds familiar. Yeah.
They were on the roster. Rodney Culver, the late Rodney Culver, was on the roster. I believe Anthony Johnson still was, but I could be wrong. He might have just been 89. I can't remember. They also had Vinny Serrato told me this straight up. He was the recruiting coordinator. You might have heard of the guy, Jeff Burris. He was, in Vinny's opinion, he came out of Northwestern High School in Rocky, South Carolina. Vinny had him number one on his board at tailback. They also had Willie Clark, who could play any position, who was the fastest guy on the team at running back. They had like 7 running backs that played in the NFL in some capacity on one freaking roster.
It's wild, man. It's wild.
So I'll go with that one. But
sure. But can I get a best hits? Here's
the other stat for you. How many rosters do you know of in college football history that didn't have one, but had 2 players that ran for 10,000 or more yards in the NFL? Waters and Bettis.
Yeah. That's a. I'm actually digging through my memory bank here.
I would imagine that early 2000s Miami team would be one. One of the Frank Gore was one. Did McGahee make it? Maybe, but I mean, again, it's going to be maybe one of those Oklahoma teams from the 70s, early 80s, or USC teams. But again, that's rarefied air. The talent. Assuming everybody's, and I got to believe somebody's going to leave. Somebody's either going to turn pro or leave next year. Sure. But Notre Dame's group this next year is going to be really good. If they get Aeneas to sign and nobody leaves, is it something that you could look at and say, every one of these kids at least is going to have a cup of coffee in the NFL. I mean, we don't know about Jajarian and he had an Achilles. That's like the death knell for a lot of guys. And I've seen him live. His film's great. Trust me. Seeing him live is different. He made Texas kids look stupid in the game I went to. He ran for 299 yards and had 100 yards receiving. He's absolutely insane.
That's wild.
He may not be in the top 3. So, that's not many running back groups can do that. Like this next year, assuming nobody transfers just in 23 for Notre Dame, there won't be 5 teams in the country that have a better depth chart than the Irish, in my opinion, because the 1-2 punch up front is great. And I don't know if Chris Tyree is going to transfer or not. My guess is that he would, because he's not getting much playing time. But if he comes back, Price, and then, all these other kids coming in.
Love coming in, and yeah.
I mean, you can't just sit Love on the bench. You got to do something with it. They've already got an embarrassment of riches. And, you put guys in the slot and do different things. But,
yeah.
I mean, my mom could be the running back coach and they'd be successful. She doesn't know which way the football could go. So it's a great problem to have, man.
You know what's funny is before the show, I was talking to Brian Driscoll about this a little bit, and the fact that he's like Kyron Williams is the easy comparison for Aeneas Williams. Like people always go there because of the Missouri thing and the body type, and it makes sense. It does. The running style. They both run very angry and a lot bigger than they actually are, right? Like they have that type of aggressiveness to them, I guess, as runners. But Brian kind of comped them a little bit to junior year high school version of Golden Tate's before he became like a true wide receiver. He was more of a running back that, was wide receiver skill set, but was playing a lot more running back. And I floated out the conversation, Brian, because I think you're making a great point about this, is that if you're trying to find ways to get more of these guys on the field, I wouldn't be shocked if Aeneas Williams is that big slot at some point, right? That kind of physical Golden Tate.
Right. That's how you get guys on the field. Even if he's a 1,000,000% decoy, if Chris Tyree comes back next year, every defensive coordinator knows who he is. If he's lined up on a linebacker and you have man coverage and you stick with man coverage, you can strike up the band. I mean, it's over. He's got to mug him at the line of scrimmage because no linebacker is going to run 4-3. So there's a lot of eye candy without it. I mean, he literally doesn't have to do anything but stand out there, never move after the snap, and he's impacting the play. That's the problem with the spread that drives defensive coaches crazy. And I had this conversation. I cover UCF, but one of their coaches, their DB coach, I said, man, the hardest spot other than quarterback, obviously, mentally, it's ridiculous what you got to know. But so the hardest spot in football now is slot corner, because you got the tight end in front of you on one play. He blocks on a screen, and you're a 180-pound corner. Then on the next play, it's a 5'9", 155-pound guy.
And you got the two-way go.
Yeah, I mean, as a coach, you can't tell what's going to happen because they could come out in 22 personnel. And Notre Dame certainly did some of that with 2 backs in the backfield and guys around. But that tight end can also be out there. The personnel sets have become so diversified, and Notre Dame's is going to be tremendous starting next year with these freshman receivers and the running backs. Jeremy, like Love can catch. You think that you're just going to put him at running back? And the same thing when Aeneas gets it, they're going to put him in the slot. You couldn't pay me to want to be a defensive coach at any level moving forward because they have no advantage. They never have an advantage. So, I mean, even crappy quarterbacks can look good. Think about the Auburn guy in 2013 with the RPO. He was one of the worst passers I've ever seen.
Oh, Nick Marshall.
Seconds away from winning a national title.
Yeah.
He couldn't throw it 5 yards. He was terrible. But he was a freak. And he understood how to read defensive linemen and when to pitch and hand off and all that. And they ran the ball for 300 yards a game pretty much, so it didn't matter. So you just every now and then hit a spot.
Yep. Brian, you know what's funny is Brian Driscoll hates the triple option, and I know he's behind stage listening to this, but I'm just like, just put Audric Esime as the dive back. Now you got a couple of these guys play.
Could you imagine? Could you imagine like if Holtz would have Estimé today? I don't know if you ever saw what he used to do with the T formation on the goal line.
Oh yeah.
Put Estimé in the middle of that. The middle linebacker has to just key the A gap. He can't do anything else. I mean, then you just out athlete them on the perimeter with your quarter. I mean, forget it. Yeah, it would have been sickening. I mean, that's pretty much what the RPO game is, and that's why Aeneas is so important, because they can hand it to him, they can fake it to him, they can fake it, and he can run a wheel route. He's so versatile. I've got a buddy that's coached him, and it's one of those things where he's capable of being a DB if they want it. I mean, I know he's going to be a running back, but from a physical perspective, he could be a DB, he could be a receiver or a running back. You can never have enough of those guys. And that's what Vinny and Lou did in the 80s and 90s. They brought in as many running backs as possible. And that's when everybody just ran the ball. They got them to campus. They watched them for a day or two and they moved. Rocket played running back a lot in high school too. It's just not everybody can play running back, and they just move guys around and they got to the NFL. You get guys paid, they don't care. So Notre Dame is in a similar way kind of doing that now, but they're doing it with some bigger backs. Ardrick Estime is a rare player. We're not going to see many guys like him. I mean, he just looks different, even on a college field. I mean, when they do those close-ups on like NBC, it's just like, whoa, and that helps. That helps.
I love the picture Dylan McCullough posts after every win, Brian, because you can see just all the running backs just kind of with their jerseys on with no pads, and you can see it, man. You're just like, Estime is a hoss. But then you see Jadarius Price, you're like, that's a big kid too now, man. Like he's got a little something to him. But yes, I agree. I mean, Estime is a different back, man. If you want to talk about a throwback, like he's a throwback. Any era is what Audric Estime could have played in. He's like that type of back.
100%. So he would have fit in the Big Ten in 1987.
Oh, 100%. Oh, yeah. No doubt about it.
Downhill, 1st and 10, make a business decision if you're one in the hole, because this is not going to be a good day.
No, definitely not. And I'll say this for the other part of the class impact is that from an overall perspective, we talked about St. Louis, we talked about the running back position moving forward. Another big class impact is the fact that Notre Dame now recaptures the #1 overall class after Brandon Davis-Swain decommitted from the class in 2024. #1 overall by rivals. The offensive class especially, Brian, because they have Owen Wafel on defense. They have Carson Hobbs, who they flipped from South Carolina at cornerback, the Ohio product. But they have now collected. You want to talk about the Irish invasion for a second and the impact they had that day? CJ Carr was at the Irish invasion, quarterback in the 2024 class. Cam Williams, their wide receiver commit in the 2024 class out of Glenbard South in Illinois. Aneyas Williams was there at the Irish invasion, as well as Jack Larson, the tight end out of Charlotte Catholic in the state of North Carolina. So that offensive collection from the Irish invasion, they got things rolling out here, man. And I think that it was huge, obviously, for 2024, getting a player like CJ Carr early on in this class, a quarterback with that type of name, that type of recognition, and seeing the impact, man. I mean, right now, Brian, me and Brian were talking about this on the show earlier. 2023 filled up with defense very quickly, and then offense kind of trickled in and ends up being a good offensive class in 2023, a very good offensive class. But so far, the presence of CJ Carr and his work at the Irish invasion and the offensive class here so far, getting guys like Peter Jones at offensive tackle, getting guys like Cam Williams, Aeneas Williams, Jack Larson, CJ Carr. Notre Dame is off to a tremendous start in 2024 on the offensive side of the football, especially.
It's interesting because if you look at Notre Dame historically, okay, where did they rank in a class, whether it's rivals or Tom Lemming era, whatever? They usually have higher ranked classes when they need offensive linemen because, as you guys talk about all the time and accurately, they recruited as well as anybody in the country historically. Michigan, Notre Dame, Penn State, Alabama, probably, and maybe Oklahoma or USC or the schools that have always done well there. Well, this next class, what do you think? 3 most likely on the O-line, because they've recruited it so well the last couple of years.
Yes.
And they're still, I mean, heck, I'm not saying they're done. It kind of depends on which kids come in and play and don't. There'll be somebody out of this group getting ready to sign that'll transfer next fall. Like one kid, it's just every year there's somebody like that. But they're really not going to need a whole lot by the time we get to next fall camp. They'll be done with the offensive class. They'll take really 2 or 3 receivers. They'll be done. They already got the kid. I like the kid from North Carolina that you mentioned. He's a good tight end.
Larson, yep.
And they got their stud quarterback. He's a top 50 player conservatively. Most people got him in the top 25. And O-line will take care. Harry doesn't miss very often there. They'll get 2 or 3 guys. They got Peter Jones already, et cetera. I don't even pay attention. I know this is not what fans probably want to hear, but I don't even pay attention to Notre Dame O-line recruiting. Flat out, I don't. I do not.
And Harry, we trust. I get it, man. I get it. And to your point, Brian, it was a 5-man class, obviously, offensive line in 2023. You're probably looking at 3-ish somewhere in that offensive line. You have one already in Peter Jones. They're probably going to get maybe 1 or 2 true offensive tackle types because they kind of loaded up on a lot of interior players last couple of years. So getting the true offensive tackle types. Jack Larson at tight end is a great start. I know they would like to get Carter Nelson, the 2024 tight end out of Nebraska. I don't know if you've seen this guy, Brian, but you need to go.
I haven't watched him. Driscoll keeps telling me I should see him.
He's a freak of nature, man. A 7-foot high jumper as a sophomore, all-conference basketball player, 170-foot discus thrower, like just wild. And he's playing 8-man football. So you want to talk about men amongst boys. Men amongst boys.
I was getting ready to say I'm not trying to be mean, but that's probably really boring for him.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It is child's play, man. It really is. Then So then tight end will be done if they get a Carter Nelson in the class. And then you look at the wide receivers, the question is, is it 3? Is it 4? We'll see what it ends up being, obviously. But you already have Cam Williams. You're on guys like Ryan Wingo. You're on guys like Jeremiah McClellan. You mentioned Breedell Richardson earlier as a guy that Notre Dame likes. So there's plenty of targets on the board for Notre Dame to be excited about. And then I think, and we'll get more into what's next with running back, but you might see another running back in this class, in my estimation. So that's kind of what the class impact is. We want to get into film next, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the what's next for Notre Dame and a little bit of just kind of wrapping the bow on this one. So we're going to pull up, though, the film and show you guys what makes, for us, Aeneas Williams a special running back, all-purpose back. And Brian, here we go. All right. So, of course, we're looking at the running back here, Aeneas Williams. I think the first thing that pops off to me, Brian, is that comparative to the other players he's playing against, and again, he's not the biggest back in the world. He's about 5'11", 195 to 200 pounds right now. Can definitely get up to about 210, 215, I think you said earlier, and I agree with that. But he's the most physically put together player on the field. He's the biggest guy by far. And but I think you see the physicality early on that he plays with. I think you see the speed. He's got a little bit of wiggle in the open field. So he really is just a solid all-around running back, in my opinion, from an athleticism perspective.
It's funny that he is from St. Louis because one of the things that Kyron did was after contact, his ability to stay on his feet was unbelievable. And if you look at the run right there, it's just, I know that's a high school kid, but he got him around the ankles. 9 times out of 10, even an NFL running back, that doesn't end well for them. They go down. That's a great sign. And then, of course, right here, how many kids did he embarrass right there? I don't care what competition you're in. That play right there is one of the most important plays in football. It doesn't take anything to draw that up, but he makes 5 guys miss? So coaches look brilliant when that happens.
Yep. And I love it again because you're seeing him out wide in these clips. You're seeing him at running back. You just saw him take that jet sweep and turn off the jets. And I think the long speed is pretty good. He's not, I wouldn't call him a blazer to any extent, right? Like he's not a Jeremiah Love. He's not like that type of running back, Jerry and Price, but he definitely has enough speed. He's got that all around profile. And I think you hit it nail on the head, Brian, for me, is that you can tell how competitive he is just by how he runs. He's got tremendous balance, but he's like one of those guys like Kyron Williams to a degree where I think he takes it personal that people want to try to tackle him. Like it's almost disrespectful to him. That's why in that touchdown clip earlier in the video where he looks like he could have just coasted into the end zone, he kind of slows down and just gives the guy a nice little stiff arm right before the goal line. It's like he's the tone setter for his offense.
It's amazing to me. And here's this run right here is just great.
That's wild, man. Oh, he stayed up.
Look,
he stayed up.
Look, I don't care what level you play at. There still has to be a level of desire. And running back, you take a lot of beating. I think it's still number one in the NFL for players getting injured. Safety might be right there as well. It's just because everybody's on the field trying to hit you. He doesn't care. He wants to continue going forward. And every play, he breaks a tackle. It's just ridiculous. So, I mean, his offensive line is not great. They do a solid job, but he's getting hit near the line and he still scores. That's a great sign.
Yeah, and again, tremendous balance. You see the vision. I think that's a lot why you see people that are kind of compare him a little bit to Kyren Williams for a couple of those reasons, right? Like Kyren was 195 pounds. He was over 200 at some points, but he was between 195 and 200 pounds. But he ran so physically and with such great balance and low center of gravity. And that's what I see a lot with Aeneas Williams is that he just has that real nice forward lean, breaks a ton of tackles. Just the balance, I think, is the biggest thing. And then you see him here playing wide receiver, just a little stop route, and quickly makes a guy miss in the open field and accelerates for another touchdown. And that's just littered through the film. And how many tackles did he break there, Brian? About 5 or 6 in that tight little window?
It's
wild.
It's comical because, usually on a stop route, you're going to get pummeled. And I know the comp isn't good, but he ran through everybody. So, again, it's about his effort as much as it is about his natural God-given ability.
Yep. And right there, he's playing as number one wide receiver near the end zone, and he runs just a little stutter fade and finishes in the back of the end zone. Ball skills get on this kid as well is what's interesting. You were going to phrase him as a running back, but this kid's an athlete. This is a guy that can do a little bit of everything. You see the competitiveness through the catch point right here to finish through contact between two different guys. There's a lot of stuff to take from this kid that gets you really excited as far as his all-around profile.
It's not really surprising to me that so many schools went after him after I heard about him and I watched a little film, but this is just kind of reaffirming. I hadn't watched any of his film this year because, again, I already knew how good he was. Mm-hmm. But seeing him catch the ball is probably the one thing I'm most interested in. He looks like he's just as natural catching as he is playing the running back position. Doesn't matter if he's catching a screen, if he's in the slot, or he's out wide. That is something that is good to see because he can be moved around, and Notre Dame can use, again, all those different personnel packages and really confuse the defense because he could be in the backfield on one play, they use the same personnel on the next one, and he's out wide. That is very frustrating for an opposing defense.
Yeah, and I think the wide receiver background, because again, he had over 1,200 receiving yards as a sophomore, which he made first team All-State as a wide receiver. And I think that you see some really natural ability as a route runner. He definitely understands spacing, how to attack blind spots, and there's just a fluidity to him as a route runner, which again, why do I think that he could play a little bit in the slot and maybe be that wide receiver type down the line? I think that it's that, right? He's going to be a different body type and a different play style than what you typically see from a slot receiver. But again, folks, we've seen Golden Tate in the past, right? Who was a stockier 205, 210-pound wide receiver who just broke a lot of tackles and had the running back background from high school. So I think that there's some parallels there, which are very interesting. And Brian, again, like right there, how many running backs do you run and streak down the middle of the field and be able to track the football like that? That's really special stuff at this level.
The other thing about that, every quarterback, no matter his ability, they know which guys can make plays like that. He could be completely wide open. If the quarterback doesn't trust him, they don't throw the ball. On that one down the middle, that was pretty good coverage. He still let it rip. That means he knows that Aeneas can make those plays.
Yes, and there's that play early on in the film where literally the guy intercepted the football and he stole it from him and went for 6. Right, he's that type of dude. And you see again the vision here, the ability to change direction and to bend this one all the way back to the sideline, showcases the speed. I know there was a conversation over the speed profile. And I think Brian already said he's definitely faster than Kyren Williams. There's no doubt about it. He definitely has more home run speed than Kyren ever did. But I think, again, you see that all-around profile, man, because, Brian, I've seen a little bit of his film at defensive back, to your point, because I know you mentioned that, someone had talked about it. This kid, I think, could play defensive back in college. I think he could play wide receiver. I think he could play running back. This is just all around profile is what makes it so exciting, because then you are going to combine it with what you have in the running back room if you're Notre Dame. And it's just the ability to use different personnel is what this kid brings to the table, which again is why it makes it so exciting to me. So that was a little bit of film on Aeneas Williams. Again, 2024 running back, now committed to the University of Notre Dame out of Hannibal High School in the state of Missouri. So it looks like we're going to pop on a little bit of, this is sophomore film, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I said 47 TVs.
Yep, let's watch some sophomore film. Oh, Brian Driscoll behind the set. What a great producer, sir. You are fantastic.
That's good stuff.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. And again,
he
you
was
can see
already filled out some by that age, and he just bludgeoned people.
Brian, I talked to his coach earlier, and he was just like, this kid apparently was like, in their town was just dominating the junior high circuit, as you can imagine, right? And he was just like, he kind of had a reputation before he got to us, and someone told me like, oh, this is the best kid you're ever going to have, all this stuff. And he's like, all right, man, let's relax. He's an 8th grader, right? Then he gets, I think it was one of the first days of off-season workouts, and he's like, yeah, that guy was probably right. And then he ends up with like 27 touchdowns as a freshman. So again, you see the quick twitch, you see the explosiveness, the acceleration. Definitely filled out a bit from sophomore to junior film, but to your point, Brian, like he's a very filled out kid for only being a sophomore there as well. Looks like he got a little taller too, as you would imagine.
Yeah, he just a complete football player. Just a complete football player. I'm sure that coaches in that league, albeit in private, are probably cussing and screaming about him because there's nothing they can do with their skill sets to stop him. Right. It's got to be very frustrating because they're like Ryan said earlier, they're like an hour north of St. Louis. This is not the best comp. And as a freshman, he was the best player in the league, probably by a mile. And then they have to realize that, oh, we have 3 more years of this. Fantastic.
Can you imagine being
so debilitating? So
I know, man. Imagine being an opposing coach and being like, oh, man, all right, at least we can get that kid out of here. And you're like, oh, he was a freshman. That is so
I'm sure upsetting. A lot of people didn't believe it when they first were told he was a freshman, like literally. Yeah, there's no, I'm sure, like, because that kind of kid doesn't come through that league. He just doesn't. No.
And a little backstory on that, and I should have mentioned a little bit earlier, but when talking with his head coach today, they haven't had a kid go high-level D1 ball since the late 70s, early 80s. So to your point, Hannibal does not put out this type of talent very often. And by very often, I mean in the last 45 years, they haven't put out a kid like this. So it's impressive, man. It's really impressive.
It's been a minute. Yeah, when I was in kindergarten, they had another kid like this. I'm almost 50. So that puts things in perspective. That's hilarious.
Man, it's wild. But so, I mean, Brian, we talk about this all the time, though, is the fact that but when you play this type of competition that you are easily the best, you have to dominate it, right? And that's what he does. Absolutely. 108 touchdowns in 3 years. I mean, that speaks for itself, obviously. And he only played 9 games this year, dealing with a little bit of nagging injuries.
Well, I at this point, I mean, there's really nothing left for him to prove. I wouldn't be surprised if he got any kind of – if he plays there next year, if he gets even bumped a little bit during the regular season, he'll sit out because he has nothing to gain. Right. I mean, he's already committed to that. I mean, what is he going to prove? Think about it. I mean, how many guys get 100 touchdowns in their high school career in 4 years? He did it in less than 3.
Yeah. Literally 108 touchdowns, and he missed part of his junior year, which is just that's insane, man. I'm pretty sure because I got sucked into a rabbit hole earlier. I was looking at the all-time touchdown records for high school, and it had this top 50 list. I'm pretty sure he ranks top 35 all-time in all-purpose touchdowns in a career, and he's done it in 3 years nationally. That's nationally too, folks. So, I mean, again, you see it here, and just the physicality runs with. He's going to be a fan favorite too, Brian, the day he comes in and gets on the field for Notre Dame, because it is going to be similar to Kyron when they see just how tough he runs for his size, man. And he's got a little bit of swagger to him, which can't be undersold. Notre Dame needs more swagger at certain positions. And I think that he brings that, man. You can tell that there is just a extreme confidence with a guy like Aeneas Williams.
he's going to be fun. I'm sure a guy, and I've been on him about this before at some points. I think sometimes Tommy gets a little too nifty, but here, especially the second half of this past season, they ran more base stuff and just utilized their talent. With this kind of kid, you can be nifty because he's so intelligent and he's already proven there he is in the slot. He can play anything. Oh my. Can you imagine how many different formations that you can get into that basically run the same play when you have a guy that can run and catch like that? You know, you could eventually end up in the same spot, but they just don't start there. You know, that's what the NFL teams do, and it's no different with Notre Dame. He's smart enough to figure it out, know how to get leverage on a DB or do whatever you want. These are the kinds of kids that offensive coordinators have a heyday with. So Lane Kiffin is a great example. I know he's not going to Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin would go berserk with Aeneas Williams. He's my favorite play caller, and he does a tremendous job with running backs, with screens, running them in motion, wheel routes, getting them in. I mean, even in the SEC West, which is without question the best league in college football, their running backs just beat the crap out of everybody because they scheme them. Kids like Aeneas, man, it's an open book on what you can do, and that's got to be a lot of fun for any coordinator.
You know what else it is too, Brian? I'm thinking from a defensive perspective, right? Kind of going against this type of guy because I played linebacker. He is a linebacker's worst nightmare. Absolutely. Because you see him one play as the traditional tailback. Then the next play, he's in the slot, motion him. Here comes a jet sweep. Next play, he's in the slot. Now he has to run a route, and I have to cover him. Like he's the ultimate chess piece at the running back position. The screen game is going to be a big opportunity for him. You know, some swing screens, do different types of stuff like that. As a linebacker, I'm just like pounding my head for a second. I'm like, man, I would hate going against a kid like this because he can just do so many things. And when you talk about now Jadarian Price hopefully getting back healthy from injury and Jeremiah Love coming in, you now have a plethora of running backs into the future that can be kind of those moving chess pieces to a degree. They can do so many different things. It's a headache for defenses.
Price, for those that don't know, obviously he didn't get a play last year, has very good hands. So he becomes a running back upon catching the football down the field screen.
Notre Dame fans saw him in the spring game when he housed the screen pass, so they've seen it a little bit already. Yeah.
Notre Dame, I mean, just because I'm a Bettis fan, Audric Estime excites me as much as any running back since the early 90s. And there's never going to be another Bettis. I'm not saying there is. He was 260 playing running back. I mean, and was good at it, obviously.
With a belly shirt, too. It was fantastic. Yeah.
And it didn't matter. He still just said, this is what I'm going to do, and I did it. That's when you have a guy like that, it's fun to watch because nobody wants to tackle Audric Estime. But you hit him for a couple of quarters, and this is something Holtz used to do. Bettis, Culver, Anthony John, they always played power. Tony Brooks was that way. But then in the fourth quarter, and it wasn't just Rocket, but they would put in somebody that was a little faster and or they would run a reverse or something like that. And it's just like, I do not want to chase the rabbit thereafter. Notre Dame is going to, I mean, even if you didn't have Estime, even if you didn't have him, they've got bigger backs and they still also have the ability to use big tight ends and stuff. The inside at the box, Notre Dame dominates teams. And I mean, I know they're losing Mayer. Like he's a generational player. I get it. But that helped the speed guys. It wasn't like Notre Dame had a whole lot of talent outside because the numbers were so bad. Well, that's about to change completely with this receiving class they got coming in. By the way, my random pick here, freshman to start next year is a certain young man that is committed from Dallas. I could see him starting next year at some point at slot. Those kind of players are going to be single covered all the time with the running backs they have. And then Aeneas coming in, then you can just start rotating those guys. It's no fun to cover them. Like you said, being a linebacker, if you're going to go traditional personnel, there's no hiding that. Oh, they moved the running back out there. Let me substitute. No, you don't get to do that. I mean, it's if the quarterback puts it on him, that's a huge play. And it's an open book.
It really is. And that's the key, obviously. Notre Dame, we know that. They need to get the quarterback position right over the next couple of years. There's no doubt. But one point that you made is the mismatch potential at running back and at slot receiver over the next few years is going to be big time. Because you mentioned Caleb Smith, obviously. That was who you're referring to, right? You also have Of course, Jaden Thomas coming back, who could play in the slot. Lorenzo, if he comes back, can play in the slot. Then you also have Jaden Greathouse coming in, who I think, again, he's a different type of cat comparative to a Caleb Smith, for instance. But he can do stuff in there, too, because he's got that big, physical, break tackle type of look to him. Great hands, good route runner. So you're going to have a bunch of different slot types, not even counting Jeremiah Love going in the slot occasionally, not even counting Aeneas Williams when he gets there going into the slot occasionally, not even counting Jadarian Price going in there occasionally if he comes back healthy. So there's so many different options for mismatches, which is just incredible to think about, man. Like, it's like those are that's the mismatched spots, right? Is running back and slot receiver, because you're going to get matched up with linebackers and some safeties and some nickels at times. There's advantages to be found there. Not even mentioning the fact that you're going to have Tobias Merriweather, Deion Colsey outside, who are 6'4", 6'5", right?
That's the point. The spot that Notre Dame, in most schools, to be honest, historically struggle with is corner. There's very few of them. It's by far, there's not even a second or third place to recruiting corner at an elite level that changes games other than the quarterback position. So quarterback kind of is its own entity, but skill guys, corner is hard. But if you're putting those guys out wide, I mean, the difference between a corner in coverage and even a safety usually is tremendously different. And now we're talking about, okay, we're pounding the football. Obviously Notre Dame's still even out without number 87. They're going to be good at tight end. They're still going to be able to beat on people. Harry Easton's still the O-line coach. They still have 2 elite offensive tackles, etc. They're going to run the ball. You're going to see, even when they come out in like personnel that, they could be in 0, they could be in 5 wide, and teams are still going to think about things a little bit differently, because you can motion somebody like Aeneas into the backfield. You can obviously, if Estime starts in the formation out, you can run a jet sweep to him, or you can do it with anybody they have. It's hard to go against Notre Dame running the ball and playing power football.
Yep.
So you're going to see more linebackers on the field than what the other team really wants to do, but nobody likes having their manhood taken away. Ask Clemson. I mean, look at Clemson's linebacker corps from a physical perspective. Yep. It is phenomenal. It's like Miami 1990s stuff, and Notre Dame was up 35-0.
I know.
Seriously, just think about that.
Trenton Simpson, Barrett Carter, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Yeah, man, they got dudes there, no doubt.
And Notre Dame just bludgeoned them. Now, part of that, straight up, Notre Dame's offensive line, that's as good a game an offensive line has played in Notre Dame Stadium in I don't even know how many years. So hats off to them. But they did not tackle any of the running backs that came through. And the quarterback, when given a little bit of time, he threw the ball pretty well too. So everybody did their job. Now you're adding more dynamic pieces. I mean, Notre Dame ran duo like 70% of that. It was the most boring game plan ever. And I don't think it really started that way, but like, we're getting 6 yards of carry. Why would we do anything different here? I mean, sometimes it's really that dumb. It's just like, they can't stop us. They can't stop us. So
me and Brian were at the Syracuse game, Brian. Sorry to cut you off, but it was the same way, man. It was like early on, you're just like, they can't stop duo. Like, they just can't. They can't do anything about it, They're just getting downhill. They're more physical than what Syracuse had. They're more physical than what Clemson had that day for whatever reason. And it was just repetitive, man. Because, I mean, Clemson has a great defensive line. They got some dudes on the second level at linebacker, no doubt. But that was just Notre Dame's day in the trenches. Like, they just dominated that football game, to your point.
Now, imagine doing that early in a game, maybe not quite to that. I mean, it was utterly ridiculous from point A to point B in that game.
Yep.
But you have Caleb in the slot or I've met Greathouse. I can tell you, and I know you've spoken with him, but like, I've been blessed to meet numerous Notre Dame recruits over the last 20 years, and he's one of the most mature kids you're going to see. I guarantee you that he will not only take it in a prideful manner to learn the playbook, he will learn it in different spots so they can move. Now, I'm not saying he's going to have that done by the end of fall camp. That's ridiculous. But he'll be in that group quickly. And when you can start moving guys around, that's when the other team has to just run, screw it. We're just going to run cover 3. Don't let them score, that kind of, and then you can just pick your poison on what you want to do with personnel and play calling. Because when was the last time we said that about Notre Dame, where they were moving guys around and quote unquote dictating to the other team? Was it when
Right.
Brady Quinn was there or Clausen? I mean, it was in that realm. I mean, they
probably
just haven't had the
Clausen,
skill
yeah.
guys. They just haven't had the skill guys to do it. So I don't even
Yeah.
know how to approach this. Like, it's going to be fun to be an offensive fan again because I've enjoyed watching them play defense more the last 10, which is okay, but they have not had a great offense in a very long time.
Yep.
So balanced. I mean, it's okay to run the ball, but at some point, if you're going to win a national title or even come close, you must have the ability to throw the ball, and the other team knows you're going to throw the ball. Period.
And of course, you can supplement some of those touches with these running backs that Notre Dame's getting. But to your point, I agree 100%. You're starting to get a wide receiver room that it's how it's supposed to look at a high level school, right? With Deion Colsey, Tobias Merriweather, Jaden Greathouse coming in, Braylon James, who's a really talented player, still a little bit raw, but developing at a quick rate. Rico Flores, Caleb Smith, getting into now Cam Williams and some of those guys moving forward in the 2024 class.
All of a sudden.
Yeah. Oh, man. The 2024 class has some crazy wide receivers, man. We were talking about earlier in the show, it's not probably not realistic for Notre Dame, but Micah Hudson out of Texas is another guy that's just like freak show, man. Just absolute freak show.
Him and my favorite is Jeremiah, the kid that just committed to Ohio State. I know
Jeremiah Smith. Yeah.
Flat out, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He will be a top 10 pick. That's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, man. That class is ridiculous with him and Wingo, we already mentioned, Micah Hudson, Bredell Richardson. There's a lot of crazy wide receivers in that class. Cam Williams, who's committed to Notre Dame right now. Like, so many good ones. But let's talk about the what's next section of this podcast, Brian, as we kind of wind down here moving forward. So obviously now the running back side of things, you have a running back committed in the 2024 class with Aeneas Williams. You're looking at these last two cycles, this cycle that we're currently in 2023 and 2024. 2023, you're bringing in Jeremiah Love after bringing in Jabron Payne, Jadarian Price the year before, and a two-man class before that of Logan Diggs and Audric Estime. Starting to get a very heavily populated running back room, obviously, right? So numbers are going to look, we believe, as this. Because right now, 2023, you have Jeremiah Love. We spoke about it earlier in the first podcast, but I just want to reiterate this again. Everybody knows Notre Dame's, and we have at boards.irishbreakdown.com, Brian put an update on this earlier today. If you want to go sign up at the message board, you can, because we go a little more in depth on this. But Jaden Lamar, who is committed to Notre Dame currently, is planning on visiting Oregon officially this weekend. And as we know, Notre Dame's policy, players that take official visits, Notre Dame is going to chooses to treat those players as decommitted players. And to our knowledge, Jaden Lamar, if he chooses to make that visit, we'll see what happens at that point, right? So as of right now, we are only comfortable in saying Jeremiah Love will be in the class, but we'll see obviously what the weekend brings with Jaden Lamar. So now, originally, Brian, I was saying, and me and Brian have talked about this before, maybe 2024 running backs, maybe you only take one, right? That might be one and done. And Aeneas Williams was a guy that Notre Dame pushed for very quickly, obviously. That was a guy that they love. Now the question is, do you go to two running backs, which I think is very possible in the class? And there's some extremely, extremely talented players that are on the board for Notre Dame. Couple key names to kind of keep an eye on. Corey Smith is a player that, from everything that we have gathered, it seems Notre Dame is pretty high on out of the state of Wisconsin. He reminds me a lot of Ronald Jones, who's incredibly speedy, one cut, downhill, fast, break big runs. Like, that's what Corey Smith looks like to me. Again, in the state of Wisconsin, he's not playing the greatest competition, but you see that home run speed, and it is fantastic to see. And then also, we have Davion Goss, who I'm sure you are very familiar with, Brian, in the Florida area. He's a little bit of a bigger back, 5'10", 210 pounds. Also have Nathaniel Palmer, who's on the board. Brian Jackson, second out of the state of Texas. They're both out of the state of Texas. But as of right now, I would be willing to say, and Anthony Carey's another one out of Florida as well. So a couple Florida guys, Anthony Carey, Davion Goss to keep eyes on. and then Corey Smith out of Wisconsin are the main guys I think that we should really keep eyes on here moving forward. And Brian, I don't know if you have just kind of a national opinion of a couple of those names, but the running back class in 2024, to me at least, looks like a really good class overall. And I think it might be a good idea for Notre Dame to dip again and to get that second running back in the class.
I know both the Florida kids. I know Anthony Carey personally. He's a Tampa kid. He plays with Breedell. That school's got a ridiculous amount of talent. Carey is similar to the young man that committed to Notre Dame today, Aeneas. He's very determined. He is a Florida kid on the field, but not necessarily a Florida kid off of it, which is good for Notre Dame. I'll leave it at that for now. But Gauze is a kid that it's not quite as fast. He will thump you. I saw him each of the last couple of years, but the best play I ever saw from him, he wasn't even playing offense. This puts things in perspective. They call him Bullet, and I don't know what it's from. He's a big, thick kid that likes to run downhill. And again, your business decision running into him. He was on kickoff his freshman year. I was at a game. They were playing Clearwater Academy International, and somebody just completely whiffed on a block. And the guy that was the return man is still cussing him. The hit that he put on a kid, and this was a really good play. Like, he just completely smashed him. And I'm like, that's the kid the coaches told me about. And I checked him out in he looked like he was, 18 years old when he was 14. He's that kid. So he's your downhill power back. He's a Logan Diggs type. That would be my comparison for him. If you take either one of the two Florida kids, you're good to go. I don't know the Texas kids as well. I've seen them at a combine, but that's not the same in pads. But any of those to go with Aeneas is an A class at running back.
Yes.
So whatever one wants to come, I would like to see him get carried just because I know the kid personally. That would be cool for me, but all of them are good. So Notre Dame would be in good shape.
Yeah, they have a very talented board right now for the running back position outside of Aeneas Williams. So expect Notre Dame to possibly take a second running back in the 2024 class. And just to reiterate this again, we talked about this earlier in the show, Brian. The St. Louis pipeline that Notre Dame is building is another huge, huge, huge priority. Ryan Wingo, star receiver out of St. Louis University. Jeremiah McClellan out of Christian Brothers is another big one. They've also offered Ja'Shawn Ross, although we don't think that one's super realistic. The defensive end, he plays wide receiver out of the state of Missouri as well. But Notre Dame is going to definitely keep their eyes on the St. Louis area as we move forward. So that's kind of what's next. Running back position, adding to the 2024 class, St. Louis as a continued pipeline for Notre Dame. I know we have a few questions and comments that we want to hit on before we get out of here. So let us go down to from Tom Adams, who says, I'm late watching, but I think the only other college teammates to rush for 10,000 each is Thurman Thomas and Barry Sanders. That's a good one. That's a good call there. It's a good call.
That's got to be right there.
Yeah. We also had Brandon Plisner, who says, can we please get a second running back in 2024? Corey Smith, Nate Palmer. Yeah, Brandon, I think that's – yeah. And those two are very different backs, right? Palmer's a little bit bigger, a little more physical. Corey Smith's more of the home run hitter type of back. But I agree, Brandon. I think that Notre Dame is going to be in the conversation for another second running back in the class. It's just about, for me, because there's very diverse skill sets too, which we talked a little bit about, Brian. But, do they want a bigger back to couple with an Aeneas Williams? Do they want more of a speed back to continue just kind of that playmaking mismatch ability? I think the question goes to style. Like, what do you want to pair with Aeneas Williams, which would be interesting, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, again, all these kids that we're mentioning are good. They're just different skills. Exactly. I would think the kid from the state of Wisconsin would be the most unique of them because I think he has the most sheer speed. But
yes,
again, I wouldn't have any complaints about any of those young men.
Yep. Because you already hit on kind of what Anthony Carey brings. He's got kind of that all-around skill set as well. But the Davion Goss is a downhill thumper. They got Brian Jackson on the board, who's kind of more of a downhill thumper as well. Corey Smith is that pure speed type. So just what do you want to pair with him, Brandon? But I agree. I think a second running back is definitely possible. From Charlie Weiss's last belt loop super chat. Thank you so much for that, Charlie. You can't spell stud without Aeneas. This guy will be playing on Sundays one day. Ryan and Brian, what do you see his potential being? This is potentially 3 5-stars in the 2024 class. CJ Carr, Cam Williams, Aeneas Williams. Brian, it's an interesting question because we talked about how Aeneas will be used right at the next level, kind of being that all-purpose type player. But overall upside, I guess the potential, how good, I guess, do you think he could be if he hits his upside?
I'm going to put him in rarefied air since we were talking about 10,000-yard running backs. For old-timers like me, most people probably don't remember this or know this. Ricky Waters played receiver at Notre Dame in 88. I'm not saying that Notre Dame is going to use Aeneas in that fashion, but he's skilled enough that if he, literally moved to the receiver position in spring of his, freshman year to play at his sophomore, he could do it. So I just think they're going to move him around and really irritate the holy heck out of the opposing team's defense coordinator. If you don't know where they're going to line up, it's not fun. Think about Reggie Bush. Mm-hmm. Now, Norm Chow was a solid offensive coordinator. I'm being very kind into saying it that way. That's the kind of thing you see everybody do now, but they used to move Reggie all over the place. And I'll never forget seeing him in Notre Dame Stadium. He was out. Notre Dame went man coverage, and they didn't call timeout. And they had a linebacker on him out to the field by himself with no safety help. How do you think that ended? These are the kinds of, not good for Notre Dame. You have to change your coverages. And that's why you see so many teams either just going all out blitz, we're going to try to kill a quarterback, or they're playing really soft zone because they don't have enough skill guys to match up. Aeneas gives Notre Dame that SEC type. There's another way to put it. Like Ole Miss does, like Alabama did a few years ago, LSU. When you can start moving the guys around like that, his upside is just through the roof. And again, he doesn't have to touch the football to make an impact. That's the most important thing. Yep. When you can do that, man, it is a nightmare. Nobody likes it as a defensive coach.
Well, at the running back room that Notre Dame is building as well, Brian, to your point, is that it's going to build a lot of one-on-ones outside, and they're starting to get wide receivers now that can potentially take advantage of that. And quarterbacks, now getting them in the building, that's going to be the big point, right? Can Kenny Minchie be that guy? Can Tyler Buckner, if he's healthy, can be that guy? Can CJ Carr be that guy? The quarterbacks at the next level over the next few years is going to be paramount for Notre Dame because they're going to have a lot of talents at the wide receiver spots, at running back. They're going to have a lot of talent. There's no doubt. And Charlie, thank you so much for the super chat. Really do appreciate it. Want to go to Nathan Lytle. Said, how much does getting Aeneas help with guys like Ryan Wingo and Jeremiah McClellan? I would say this, Brian, for me, look, I did a sit-down interview with Jeremiah Love out of Christian Brothers after what he was planning on committing to Notre Dame. And the first thing he said was, I'm already recruiting guys like Ryan Wingo and Jeremiah McClellan. And you mentioned already in this podcast, the St. Louis guys are pretty tight-knit, man. Like, they talk a lot.
They all know each other. Yeah.
Christian Gray talks to Jeremiah all the time, talks to Wingo all the time. That group's close. Now, this, again, Hannibal's a little bit away from St. Louis, but trust me when I say they're all very familiar with one another. So does it help? I think so. But I think that more than anything, the pipeline is what really is starting to help because you have multiple guys from that area now that are starting to accumulate, right? If it was just Aeneas, it helps a little bit, but it's not like earth-shattering, needle-moving. But the fact that you have Christian Gray, that you have Jeremiah Love, that you have Aeneas Williams, is that going to help with Ryan Wingo? Absolutely. Is it going to help with Jeremiah McClellan? Absolutely. No doubt.
There's the young man that's a freshman this year, the D lineman that's from St. Louis as well. Ford? Isn't that his name?
Oh, yeah. Tyson Ford, yes. And then you had
St. Louis kid, so that can't hurt.
No, and then you had Gabriel Rubio that came out of Missouri as well. Kyron obviously is a guy. He was one that Jeremiah Love actually mentioned by name, and I didn't even bring him up, was Kyron Williams and the impact that he had on the St. Louis community, which is
really
funny because, he mentioned that. He was like, I watched Kyron go to Notre Dame and do what he did. And I was like, I didn't know that his impact kind of dug that way. But like to your point earlier in the podcast, those guys, it's kind of like a tight-knit community, man. Like they really do kind of feed off of one another, it seems.
Most of the elite players tend to go to the same trainers, so they probably all knew each other from that.
No doubt. So St. Louis definitely a priority, no doubt, and I think it will help. Last question that we have here queued up is from Bobby S. Who would you guess is the next 2024 commit? Anyone close? What position group would you expect it to come from? So great question. Great question. I think Notre Dame's in a good spot with several good players. If I had to put where I feel maybe that they're trending in the best direction with a couple guys, I would go to the defensive line first and foremost. I think is the spot that Notre Dame is trending with a couple guys. One is TJ Lindsey, who's out of the state of Arkansas, Bryant High School, big 6'5". Yes, he can. I mean, they win the state championship every single year. For people that aren't familiar with Arkansas high school football, which I'm really not either, but I just know that from covering him, is that he is 6'5", 270, kind of that strong side defensive end, maybe a 3 technique down the line. He is very high on Notre Dame. Notre Dame is high on him by all accounts that we have gathered. I would also say the Smith twins out of the state of Connecticut, Jacob and Jared Smith, who are defensive linemen as well. Jacob 6'5", 225, more of that Viper type. Jared Smith, more of the 6'3", 265 right now. Strong side defensive end who probably is a 3 technique long term. So those are a couple guys that I feel like Notre Dame's in a really good spot with right now. I don't know if anybody is, I would say, close to a decision. I mean, TJ Lindsey, last time I talked to him, which was yesterday or the day before, he kind of told me his timeline as of right now is sometime in the spring, most likely, maybe inkling into the early summer. Like most of these guys are kind of stating, and we know this changes all the time, they're kind of stating that, they're kind of taking it slow a little bit. Carter Nelson's another one that I think Notre Dame's getting in a really solid position with, the tight end out of Nebraska, but he is another kid that the attention's kind of new for him, which is understandable coming from Ainsworth, Nebraska. And, he's talked about, thoroughly that, his father's told me as well that, like, I'm not in a rush. Like, this is very new to me, like he grew up knowing Nebraska football, but Notre Dame now coming in and all the schools that are starting to show him attention, it means something, obviously. So that's who I would say are the closest as far as how things are trending. Peyton Woodyard, the safety out of St. John Bosco and Cali, he's committing in 23 days, I think, from today. I think Notre Dame's in a solid spot, but it's hard to tell who is the clear leader there. I know some people have said Georgia. Some people think that Notre Dame still has a good opportunity with, him being Kyle Hamilton's cousin and him being very familiar with the program, all that stuff. So he's a guy to keep an eye on, but I don't know if I would say Notre Dame is like the clear leader for them to land right now with, a few weeks to go. So it's kind of what I see right now. Defensive line, I think, is a big one. Tight end, keep an eye out on Carter Nelson. Peyton Woodyard, obviously a very talented safety out of St. John Bosco, another guy to keep an eye on. So question for you.
Yes. Best bet for Notre Dame, class of 24, corner.
It's so tough right now, man. Emilio Agar just came off the board. Notre Dame was not in his top 5. I didn't really feel great about that one at the time regardless. I know that Notre Dame is pretty high on Aaron Scott out of the state of Ohio. And I know there is definitely some reciprocated interest there. But, I mean, honestly, Brian, I mean, me and Brian Driscoll have talked about this a little bit. There's a lot of names on the cornerback board right now, but I don't know if there's anybody that I would say Notre Dame's in a fantastic position right now. Like, yeah. I mean, like,
that makes me nervous.
They're recruiting guys, like I said, they really like a guy, I mean, they like Aaron Scott a lot out of Ohio. They're recruiting guys like Braden Lee out of the state of Maryland, Dakota Fields, who's out of California. They're both very long corners. Kobe Black's a kid out of Texas. I know that they're keeping close tabs on, obviously, but there's not really anybody that I feel great about right now, if I'm being completely honest with everyone. So cornerback's a spot that you're definitely have to keep a close eye on, because I feel like it may expand at some point depending on how some things go. Like, that's where we are. And then I also know that Notre Dame's going to keep close eyes on Caleb Beasley out of Tennessee, who's committed now to the University of Tennessee. But I know Notre Dame is very high on him, and he was also at the Irish Invasion. So they're going to keep plugging away at cornerback spot, but I don't feel great about anybody right now, but things obviously will change in that regard. But it's a great question. Folks, that is going to do it for this podcast. Breaking down again, Aeneas Williams committing to the University of Notre Dame, 7th commit in the 2024 class, now ranked back again at number 1 in the class according to Rivals.com. Appreciate Brian Smith, of course, for being with me tonight. Appreciate Brian Driscoll for being the greatest producer that money can buy. Fantastic work behind the scenes, sir. Want to thank everybody out there for joining us for this exciting day in Notre Dame football. The pessimism, pay raise. There we go. I love it. I love it, man. I love it. You saw it. Everyone saw the pay raise right there, right? So go to the board and say, Ryan needs a pay raise. Just kidding. Obviously, I'm very happy with what my pay is, but you should subscribe to the podcast, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Go to board.irishbreakdown.com. Again, if you were on the board, you would have known that this was probably coming about 2 weeks ago, five weeks ago, maybe. It's been a minute, man. So stay in tune to Irish Breakdown. Go to the message board, frequent the website. We'll have a lot more great information, but more than anything, hit that notification bell because we have only a few days until National Signing Day. So we'll have a lot of shows coming up very soon here. So from Brian Smith, I am Ryan. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you, and we'll catch you on the next edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast.